Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, though, when you look at the history of it, it's not too far off. Alright, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Bartu. Joining me today is...
Steve Baxi.
Steve Baxi. So today we're talking about Macho Fantasies. And I don't know if I'm gonna, keep that as the title. That's, the most streamlined way I could think of it. If I were going for 2018 snooty Geeky Gentleman topic name, I might go for masculine fantasies and ideals or something. But I'm just gonna go with the more clickbaity Macho Fantasies. And this is something I've been ruminating on for a little while. A couple weeks ago, we were on call and we were talking about zombie apocalypse scenarios and how everyone's like, oh yes, we're gonna get through and survive it. I'm like, nah, I'm just gonna sit down and die, man. I'm sorry. I'm not in for it. And so we've been talking about that, and I've actually just been consuming a lot of media that, even though I like it, I can't deny that, underneath it all, there is just a very, masculine, macho fantasy to it. I've been listening to some audiobooks from the Predator franchise, and that's a franchise all about just masculinity. I listened to The Stand by Stephen King, and that's the progenitor of a lot of the end of the world apocalypse survival fiction. So weird that book came out in the fucking 70s, right before, decades before all the zombie fiction and shit. But yeah, so I've been consuming a lot of media that's got that underlying macho fantasy. The only thing I'm missing out on is your James Bonds and the one man with a gun against an entire army of people, one at a time, just killing them all. And I'm just that whole thing. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about whatever the fuck is going on with those in a real general kind of sense. So yeah, Steve, what are your thoughts on macho fantasies in fiction?
All right. So immediate hot take. I think they get a bad rap.
Okay.
I think we have kind of gone in a circle where you had in the 40s and 50s the proliferation of men's adventure novels. And stuff like James Bond especially, but a lot of other characters in that same ilk of just a cool, rugged guy who saves the day and slaps around women and gets with all the girls and can take down armies. And these were in a lot of senses just dime store paperbacks or in pulp magazines. And then of course you have it in noir movies and stuff like that. And it was a very popular genre. It was definitely a genre for teenage boys, but it was popular nonetheless. And then over time we've kind of course corrected. With the GoldenEye, when Judi Dench, one of her first lines is that Pierce Brosnan's James Bond is a misogynist dinosaur and a relic of the Cold War. And we get kind of self-aware about it and realize that this is a problem. And so we do two things. We stop making stories about this explicitly, or we do female versions of the same thing and pretend like it's somehow different, even though you're kind of perpetuating the exact same thing. Where instead of having a range of emotions and experiences for men to portray, you then shrink female experience down to just the macho version of it. And so it just kind of everyone just kind of becomes Sarah Connor from T2, forgetting the fact that she's a very different character in T1. But now we've kind of gotten full circle again, which is I kind of dig when we do these sorts of stories and we aren't ashamed of the fact that that's just what they are. Like, everyone and their mother talks about doing James Bond, and every person who's ever done James Bond will always do an interview or something, and they're just like, yeah, we wanted to make him more progressive and more realistic, and James Bond's not a very good spy, and we're going to try and put around him and make him seem more like a real secret agent. And no one has the balls to say, now, what if James Bond was just goofy? What if he was just roaming around, flying on private jets and sleeping with everybody? Like, that's kind of fun. There is a joy to these things. I think you can go wrong with them and you start perpetuating a toxic idea of masculinity. You start shuttering out more complicated perspectives, and you do sort of run the risk of having a character who's cool because they're misogynistic. But I think you can do a bad character like that in a fun way without at the same time perpetuating that as the norm. Like, a character can just be allowed to be that way and be the butt of the joke and be endearing at the same time. And I kind of miss when we were comfortable doing that kind of stuff. Like, you look at a lot of the roles like Glenn Powell has taken recently in movies like Anyone But You or the upcoming Twisters. And he's just like the ultimate fuckboy with muscles, and it's great and it's hilarious and we all love him because he's really, really dumb, but he also appeals to a certain kind of male fantasy, and it's entertaining to watch.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right about, like, the history of it, how it's, like, it seemed like we needed to become self-aware and needed to like, make more room, but the machine of Hollywood was kind of just baked in, so it made room, but in a very specific way. I guess for me, I don't find a lot of them appealing in and of themselves for the male, like, the male fantasy, the male experience kind of thing. I think the one franchise that I do kind of get and kind of vibe with is just the masculinity on display in the Predator movies. Well, because, like, the thing with those is it is just that ultimate of, like, nah, I could do that. Like, I could be there. I could survive this. I could, be in the fucking jungle and being hunted, and I could get out. And that's, like, a very, very core fantasy. It's like, I mean, it's in a way, it's like very historically rooted, too. So it kind of works. That's what I can identify with. But I just, like, get so fucking bored and so disinterested in some of the broader ones, like your James Bonds and your apocalypse survival things, and I'm just like, I just don't want to be like the one dude out there trying to make it in the fucking world when the rest of the world's just shit. Nor do I want to just have a gun and have this fucking power fantasy of, I can kill this motherfucker, I can kill that motherfucker. There's just nothing that's, like, interesting to me about it. Because, like, the James Bond aesthetic of, like, just that one dude with a gun goes into a building, kills every motherfucker in there one at a time, makes a pun before they die kind of thing, just does not appeal to me in any way, shape, or form. We've talked about it, and, like, you roll your eyes at me that I just have no interest in ever watching a John Wick movie because I don't care what they're doing to me. It is just that. And that's how I feel about, like, every movie that is just dude with gun goes and kills a bunch of people because whatever the fuck they did, I don't care. So I kind of just tune out of that so hard, and I think that, and maybe it's a little unfair to put that all on James Bond, but I think he is, like, the poster child for that genre of thing. And then again, the apocalypse thing, just, nah, I don't want to live in a world where I just have to, like, fucking drink my own pee to survive or whatever the fuck's going on here. I'd rather just die. Fuck it. And I'm sorry, but that's just how I feel about that. So I don't know, a lot of the macho fantasy fantasies that I see portrayed in a lot of media, those I think are the big three. And Predator's probably the smallest of those, but there's a lot of stuff out there that's of a similar vein. but I just don't find any interest or intrigue in those. They honestly just bore the shit out of me 9 times out of 10. And if I do find something interesting in them, it's like it's outside of the male fantasy thing. Like I find kind of like your Death Wish is in a similar vein to the James Bond male fantasy archetype. But I don't find like the power fantasy of, oh, wouldn't it be so cool to kill all these people to be interesting about Death Wish. I find like the slow descent into not even being like human anymore is the thing that I find interesting about like that first film. So I don't know. I'm kind of. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. I'm not sure what like a good direction is to go beyond this, but that's my initial thoughts.
So I agree with you when it comes to apocalypse stuff, because you and I are of the same mind that if the apocalypse happened today, we would both just kill ourselves, because what the fuck's the point? I've never, in my history of watching movies and TV, I've never really been interested in like zombie apocalypse stuff, like The Walking Dead or any of that shit. Like it just bores the crap out of me. But on the other hand, the action movie side of it is really interesting, because with John Wick, I feel like you could split hairs here and say he's less of the men adventure style masculine fantasy and more of a early iteration of what people now call the ultimate wife guy. And I think the idea of the macho fantasy has kind of evolved a little bit, where the old sort of misogynist James Bond picture has kind of been replaced by the wife guy. And the wife guy is as popular with women as it is with men, and has become really popular in movies and TV and manga and comics. Like Mr. Miracle's a wife guy. Way of the House Husband's a really great manga. John Wick is the journey of a man being the ultimate wife guy because he could not live without his wife. What the fuck's that show called? Ted Lasso. These sorts of male archetypes who's like defining.
No, I lost you, Steve. Steve, come back. You can blame it all on me. I was wrong, and I just can't podcast without you. Steve, come back. Any kind of fool would see. Oh, God, I can't hit those notes. I'm sorry, people. I've let you down, but more importantly, I've let myself down.
Oh no. Have you there we go. Have you read Way of the House Husband?
No.
Okay, alright. So Way of the House Husband, what was the last thing I said that you...
You were saying John Wick is like the ultimate wife guy and like Ted Lasso as well.
Right. Yeah, and essentially all I was saying is like the idea that the macho fantasy has gone from the buff guy who fucks around and shoots people with a gun has kind of been shifted over to the wife guy, and that's become the new sort of popular male fantasy. Way of the House Husband's a really good example of this, because it's a manga that started up in, I want to say like 2020, maybe something in that range. And essentially the idea is just like the best, most powerful, coolest Yakuza boss of all time decides he wants to retire so he could stay home and support his wife. And that's just the whole pitch. And it's like something like 14 or 15 volumes of it out are now. And it's just the dude going around like grocery shopping and cleaning the house and taking care of the pets. And people fucking love that shit, because the macho fantasy in there is just being a happy, fulfilled, married guy. John Wick, similarly, is just the ultimate story of a guy doing just that. It's just about him having an existential crisis because his wife died. And I think that's an interesting evolution of the macho fantasy, because the macho fantasy, I feel like now when you look at that sort of stuff, has become less about the machismo side of it and more about like this unique, like very millennial idea of masculinity, where it is a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more fun. And you can do the same thing. You can have your main character in House Husband or John Wick blow people apart with a gun because they're the most capable person on the planet, but they're relatable because at the end of the day they're just kind of in their feels about how much they love their wife.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that that shift has happened, but it's kind of funny because like that shift has become so noticeable that like they're even making memes about it now. Like I love the pictures of like the from under the sheets, and there's like a girl under the sheet like smiling at the camera or something, and people like anytime one of these fucking pictures gets posted, someone like quotes it or just comments on it. It's like the dead wife in an action movie.
Yeah.
It's so fucking on point because like it's almost just an evolution of fridging characters. Like I feel like the term women being fridged. Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. The term women being fridged is almost like too out of date and like specific because it's just making fun of Kyle Rayner, who like that's the only time in his comics he does some shit like that. Whereas I feel like the term needs to be updated to be like the wife got sheeted, where like all you know about the wife is that she looked like beautiful or whatever under the fucking sheets of the bed and she was like laughing or some shit, we fucking played that one out so hard now. So here's my question, because the franchises we're talking about and mentioning all do seem to revolve around like a pretty central idea, because this happens in Predator, this happens in John Wick. He said like he loses his wife and blah blah blah. So what is it about the male fantasy, this happens in the zombie movies, about just being the fuck alone and just being the last one alive, and now you've just got to kill a lot of people? The fuck is up with that? That seems fundamentally unhealthy to me.
I don't know if that's in John Wick, really.
I've not seen it. I'm just going off of what you were telling me, where you said that she's gone.
Yeah, she dies of cancer. Her. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, no, John Wick is actually the opposite of that, because John Wick's whole thing is that he gets out of the life of being the best mafia hitman ever because he falls in love, and she's dying of cancer, so they know they have a limited amount of time, but he chooses to do it anyway. So then she dies at the start of the movie, and she gifts him, after she dies, a puppy to take care of. And the whole premise of the first movie is that John was grieving his wife. He got a puppy that was supposed to symbolize the idea that he doesn't have to grieve alone, and then someone kills the puppy. And he goes on the rampage to try and kill the guy who killed the puppy because it was the last thing that he had for his wife. And it's kind of the opposite, where it's not about him being the last man standing, it's about him being sad that he's the last man standing.
I mean, I'm going to still push back and say, but ultimately, he is the last man standing.
Well, no, because he dies at the end of the franchise. It's kind of not that at all.
I mean, it took the fact that it's a franchise, and I'm going to push back and just say, if his fucking wife is dead, and then his dog's dead, and then he's all alone, and that's where the movie starts.
He gets a new dog at the end of the first one. He's never actually alone. He has friends in the second one and the third one.
Okay. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and talk too much about John Wick because I don't have the knowledge for it, and I don't really care. But you do agree with me that there is this trend of, why do men want everything they love to die so they get an excuse to be a badass? What the fuck's going on with that? That seems like there's something wrong there.
There is this sort of obsession with creating a character that's just like consumed by their to an unhealthy degree. Like you could even say Batman is, because Batman is essentially a kid that never grew up out of this trauma that he very easily could have. And we don't have to make the argument of like Batman should have gone to therapy or whatever, but like there is this component of like vengeance and violence that is kind of juvenile. And with Batman comics in particular, the good stories kind of call attention to that tension, that Batman is both a capable adult, but also morally and emotionally just kind of a child. And with a lot of like adventure or macho fantasy stories, they're kind of not aware of that, which is what makes it a problem. Like you watch a lot of like buddy cop movies and stuff, and like the main characters are just like behaving like children. They refuse to take orders from anybody. They refuse to ever change. They refuse to be considerate of other people or their surroundings. They're just like going through the city like fucking wrecking balls, and they're kind of children. I've been watching Justified recently. Have you seen Justified?
No, I just remember my dad trying to get me to watch it when it was first coming up on the air, and he's like, "Oh no, it's great because he kills someone at the end of every episode, but it's justified." I was like,
well, it's a really good show. Justified is about a U.S. Marshal named Raylan Givens, and in the beginning of the first episode, like I'm talking the cold open of the episode, he just walks up to a guy at a restaurant, and he's like, "I gave you 24 hours to leave town, or I was going to kill you." And then he kills him like an old school cowboy, and he's got a cowboy hat and everything. And then the whole rest of the episode is like, what the fuck? You can't do that. You're not a cowboy. And then the rest of the season is like, you realize you're in a load of trouble because you can't fucking do that. And that's really entertaining too, because Justified kind of takes this premise of Raylan is a cowboy who belongs out in the Old West, who's got an Old West sense of morality, who has an Old West anger issue, and is kind of an emotionally stunted child. And he's transported into a modern-day situation where all of the contexts are a lot more complicated than that, and he's trying to solve every problem with a Western mentality just kind of makes them worse. And that's really interesting to watch because at the end of the first episode, he has like this sort of emotional breakthrough where he's like, I didn't realize I could ever get that angry and just kill a person in cold blood. And then his ex-wife is like, Raylan, you are the most angry person I have ever met in my life. What the fuck do you mean you just realized this?
So is the answer that, like, men just want to be alone because they don't want to go to therapy and, like, actually deal with their problems?
We can't all be Tony Soprano. We can't all just go to therapy and make our life better.
Oh, my God.
The Sopranos is another good example, too, of, like, the whole idea of that show essentially being that the anxiety that Tony has is not anything he can solve unless he gets out of this life, and he just kind of adamantly refuses to get out of that life, and it just keeps blowing up on him. So, like, with Macho Fantasies, I feel like you can kind of take it one of two ways, because, like, you've seen stuff like in Justified or in The Sopranos where you're like, yeah, that character is really cool, I love that guy. But the stories are self-aware enough to make you realize that this character has problems and that he's creating his own problems more than anything else. And even the good Batman stories will do this. The problem you run into is like when that portion of it isn't self-aware or isn't part of the narrative or part of the tension of the story. The Batman comics that are just like, Batman's the coolest because he's angsty don't have a lot of staying power outside of just 12-year-olds.
No, but I mean, Steve, isn't that just every Batman comic you like, though?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
He's not ready yet, folks. We need a couple more years of therapy. Sorry, I was trying to get him there, but he's got to come to it in his own time. Oh... I don't know. Is Batman just a macho fantasy, do you think?
I think so. I think Batman's more of a macho fantasy than Superman is, to be honest with you.
I'd say Superman at his worst, Superman's like a power fantasy, but yeah, I'd agree with you. Batman's more of a macho fantasy.
Because I think at the end of the day, Batman being this sort of broody, rich playboy is kind of leaning into all of these expectations that are specifically masculine in a way that I don't think Superman necessarily is. He is in certain respects, to be sure, but I think the idea of what Superman says about being a man versus what Batman says about being a man, the Superman route is a little bit healthier than the Batman route. And you know the Superman route is healthier because Superman doesn't have have a fan base who's terminally online and essentially just refuses to get out of the aesthetic of being depressed and blaming women for all their problems. Batman has a much bigger incel fan base than Superman ever will. It's true though, right? Like all these fuckers on the internet who are like, "Oh my god, I'm the Joker," or people can't keep up with me. I'm literally Batman.
God damn.
It's true though.
I mean, yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just you're not supposed to say that part out loud.
Yeah, I mean that's fair.
Oh wow, that's a good one though. I'm trying to think, is there a character who is nothing but a macho fantasy? Like it's purely just that, and there's really nothing like that's been done with them that at least you're aware of that's like got any more depth than the idea of just man wants to be like this, and that's why people are attracted to it.
I feel like there's a lot. They probably just don't have the sort of staying power that some of the other concepts we're talking about do, like James Bond, where you can kind of evolve him and do a lot of things with him. Or at the very least, if that's all they are, then that's kind of the point of the story, is that this is a bad thing. I think a lot of like old school detective novel main characters are kind of like this, where you've got like the executioner novels, and the guy will like go on speeches about like how we are fucking up the environment and capitalism's bad and yada yada yada, but then like he won't take a case because the woman isn't hot enough, you know? Like there isn't a whole lot of emotional depth to that guy.
Come back when you got bigger tits.
Literally.
That's
So
funny.
I think there's also just like a ton of movies that are just kind of like essentially one-offs that are just like straight up macho fantasies. Like I was telling you a couple weeks ago about Tango and Cash, which is one of my favorite buddy cop movies of all time, but it's fucking terrible, man. It's so bad. It's just two guys who are essentially just children trying to clear their names, but they're not really doing themselves any favors, and the movie's not very self-aware about it. I think Indiana Jones is kind of in that category too, but that's sort of the appeal. Like, that's the fun of it. Indiana Jones movies are good because they're really well-made movies with really good acting and really incredible action, and they're extremely influential.
Except for Temple of Doom.
I like Temple of Doom. I like Temple of Doom.
Temple of Doom.
I do. The only Indiana Jones movie I don't like.
Steve, wait. No. We're not just leaving it. Oh, I like Temple of Doom. No. We're gonna stay here for a minute. Everyone take a seat. Because I need to just unpack this a little bit.
I like Temple.
We're talking about the same movie, right? Like you're not mistaking it. I didn't say the wrong title. We're talking about the movie with Short Round and the movie where like Spielberg cast a woman just so he could sleep with her, and we're talking about the same movie, right?
We are indeed. I like that movie. I think it's a fun movie.
I didn't even get to the chilled monkey brains dessert and like all the Indian stereotypes in that movie.
Look, man. I'm an Indian guy. I was not offended by those things. I think they're
Okay.
I have no problem with all that stuff. But again, it's to your point, right? Of like, Indiana Jones, I don't think is a very particularly, let's say, evolved man. The third movie has that whole plot line about him and his dad sleeping with the same woman. There's like a weird sort of Freudian complex there. He is kind of essentially a child. He's always mean to everyone he talks to, but he's always just really fucking cool. And the movies are really exciting, and they're made in a way that's really, really entertaining and engaging. You can get a lot out of those movies artistically and emotionally. But I would never say that Indiana Jones is as a character anything more than a macho fantasy.
Okay. I feel like you've changed your your tune about Indiana Jones a little bit, because I feel like I remember you talking about Temple of Doom at one point and kind of shitting on it, and just like shitting on Indiana Jones. I'm not saying you're wrong to change your mind. You're allowed to. I'm just saying I feel like we've talked about Indiana Jones in the past, and you're kind of throwing a lot more shade at him.
You might be right, but I don't remember. I just know that I watched all the movies in order right before the latest one came out last year, and I liked all of them except the new one.
Damn. You even like Crystal Skull?
I think Crystal Skull is really, really good up to a point. I think it's got some of the best...
Is it the point at which he gets in the fridge and the fucking nuclear bomb goes off and he somehow survives it?
That scene is actually incredible. That scene is like so riveting to watch if you just like enjoy it for what it is. And the whole opening scene of that movie where you see Indy for the first time is incredible. The chase with him and his son through the college campus is one of the best action scenes in that movie or in that franchise. Everything up to essentially them getting to the forest and trying to solve that last puzzle that discovers aliens. Everything up to that point I think is legitimately really good.
Okay, fair enough. It's just really funny. See, because I don't think the Indy franchise is particularly good. I think the first and the third movie are about the top tier of the franchise. So I would tend to agree with you, though, that I do think that Indy is just like very much nothing but a macho fantasy, and like with all the good and bad that entails. The fact that he's got like a different love interest for the first 3 fucking movies, and he just kind of goes around, you know, getting to punch the shit out of people, and he solves things with you know, such a laid back demeanor. It's a very interesting Harrison Ford vehicle, and I can't believe they ever tried to pawn it off on fucking Shia LaBeouf of all people. But I do agree that I think there's just a very like quintessential machismo to the Indy franchise, and I think the worst of it is in Temple of Doom, where it's just the stupidest fucking shit with that movie. I cannot stand her in that fucking film. Just God, she doesn't stop talking, and they have like no chemistry together, but they end up with each other by the end of that fucking movie. Kills me. Is there a franchise that is, or a franchise or a character or a series that is like the exact opposite of a macho fantasy? Like something that maybe takes those ideas and like really fucking turns them on their head?
I think this is sort of where the wife guy evolution has kind of showed up more. I think himbos as a character are probably where a lot of this comes into, where they just like take all of the appeal of a macho fantasy, but instead of doing it through an entirely male gaze perspective, they kind of flip the script. Anime is really good about this and kind of has been for a really long time. Like if you go back and watch like Full Metal Alchemist, and you've got like Louise Armstrong, who's just like this big buff beautiful man who's always flexing, but he's also like the most tender guy on the planet, and it's kind of adorable whenever he shows up. Way of the House Husband, again, I think is a really good example of that. I also really like, and we talked about this last year, I also really like movies like Don John and Barbie for this specific reason, because I think they're very sympathetic to the idea of they know what the macho fantasy is, and they're really intentionally trying to break it down in a way that isn't trying to like make fun of the people that live it or experience it, so it's a little bit more digestible. Don John I is a movie I will take up for, because I feel like a lot of people hate it for no good reason. But I do think it's genuinely a really good movie about this guy who is the macho fantasy. And you've got like that opening scene where he goes through like all of the things that he cares about, and it's like 600 things. It's about his friends, his pad, his ride, his hair, his clothes, his women. Like he just keeps going on a list of things that he cares about, and it just gets more and more ridiculous as he's talking. but then the movie kind of slows down a little bit and gives you a sense of like, these are where these expectations are coming from. This is where his dad is like. This is what his relationships are like. This is him getting progressively more emotionally intelligent as the movie goes on. And he doesn't become perfect by the end, but he sort of turns a corner. And Ken in the Barbie movie, I think, is the same way, where like he is designed to serve a very confined purpose. And his mind kind of breaks when he discovers the notion of patriarchy. And that movie does a really good job of diving into that really fundamental point of one way to understand patriarchy is that it's driven by the insecurity of men, and Ken is an extremely insecure character. And so he has to come to figuring who he is at the end of the movie to not be that guy. And no one on the planet before that movie was going to be like, I love Ken, I identify as Ken is the coolest. But that movie kind of turned a lot of people around, because I remember that summer I bought an I'm Kenough t-shirt, and just like everybody, every guy I knew, every stranger on the street, every concert I went to, everyone was just like in love. All of these guys were just in love with the idea of Ken, of this guy who felt insecure and was obsessed and infatuated over this one person that at the end had to realize that he is Kenough, and that was a very endearing message. So I think for all of its problems, I think the Barbie movie did a really good job of creating this sort of cultural obsession over this guy who is essentially just an emotionally stunted child that realizes he needs to do some work on himself.
Some might argue that it's a kind of a problem for the Barbie movie to focus so heavily on the male character, but, we'll let it slide, I suppose.
I think that movie balances those two out pretty, to be honest.
That's fair. I still think it's pretty funny that the only one to get an award out of that fucking movie was Ryan Gosling. Like, yes, the Barbie movie. Who deserves an Academy Award for this film? Obviously the male lead. The fucking Barbie movie of all things. Meanwhile, the whole point of the movie is just off to the side, seething with rage. Anyway, I guess one franchise that kind of popped in my head, and it's very intriguing approach to masculinity and macho fantasies, is like a franchise that we often go back to on this show, but that's fine because it fucking rocks. It rocks the dragon, baby. And that's Dragon Ball. I think Dragon Ball is a really interesting take on ideas of masculinity because you have the lead of the series, Goku, who is a very inherently masculine character played by a woman. And for the entirety of his life, he's been most associated with a female voice actor. But you have this character that kind of embodies a lot of masculine ideals, yet is very pure and good in his ideals. He is the exact opposite of toxic masculinity. And then you have him come up against characters that, kind of embody very masculine fantasies and masculine ideas to various degrees. You have Vegeta, who's very stunted, very very stunted emotionally, and has a lot of trouble asserting himself, and feels like he has to kind of project that I'm the best alpha male, kind of toxic masculine image. You've got characters like Broly, who've been introduced in the franchise at multiple points and have embodied different ideas of kind of a masculine image. And then you've got characters like Frieza, who is very intentionally androgynous, but is male identifying. And it creates very interesting dynamics between these different characters and different aspects of the series.
Yeah, Dragon Ball's a good one. How do you feel about Gohan in that conversation? Because I feel like there's always these two camps of Gohan should have trained and become more powerful than Goku, and everyone who like the Great Saiyaman does understand how awesome Gohan could be. And then there are the other people who are like Gohan as a comic relief character, wanting to be the scholar, wanting to be dorky like the Great Saiyaman is some of the best stuff. I feel like that sort of masculine fantasy tension's encapsulated really well there, because ever since the Buu saga, Gohan's always kind of flip-flop back and forth between he can be the research dad, boyfriend character, but then something happens and he has to realize that he needs to train and he'll be really awesome again. And then they just keep doing that ad nauseum instead of just like picking a lane for him. And I don't know, to be honest, I fall into that camp of like that early stuff where he goes to high school and he's the Great Saiyaman and he's just dealing with hijinks is some of the best Gohan material ever, and I wish we got more of that.
I just remember it's really interesting to talk about Gohan, and there's like an argument or a diagnosis of the character out there that Gohan stopped working for people when he grew up because then he was no longer the power fantasy for the like adolescent. Because when you get to the like all throughout Gohan's introduction in Saiyan Saga, Frieza, and throughout most of Cell, he's just like the kid of the group who out of nowhere will just pull off these incredible feats and be super impressive, and then it all kind of like leads up to him and the Cell Saga and the transformation in Super Saiyan 2 and being the one that saves the day. And there's a legitimate argument for that's where the series should have ended. That's where like everything should have stopped, because you kind of have Goku's story is Dragon Ball, Gohan's story is Z up to Cell, and then Boo's just kind of there, and it's kind of awkward and weird, and you've got like the attempt to pass the torch and maybe like give Gohan one final lesson, but even then it doesn't quite work out, and it just ends up being fucking Goku and Vegeta that have to save the day, and it's a bit weird, and like the story ultimately comes up to like everybody's got to participate, and it's the point at which the series feels like it is most inventing on the fly. And then you've got everything with, like, you know, GT gives up on Gohan completely, doesn't even try to entertain the idea of him being the protagonist. And then Super, just has him kind of in this cycle of, oh no, I need to get better, I need to train more, and then he fucking trains for like a week and he's the most powerful character again, and then he just fucking slacks off. And ultimately, I think that's kind of become his character, is he's just lazy. And that's kind of interesting in and of itself, that like here's the guy who actually could be just the dude. If he just didn't stop training like Goku or Vegeta, then he would just be absolutely ahead of them at every curve. Fucking Frieza, eat your goddamn heart out. But he just isn't. He just doesn't have that kind of motivation. Like, Gohan, in a way, might just be the most like Dragon Ball character, or the most Dragon Ball fan that any character in the show could be, because like I think everyone has universally had the experience of watching Dragon Ball and it making you want to like work out, right? I think that is like at least for men. I can't really speak to if women get that same kind of reaction out of it, but like I think every man I've ever talked to about Dragon Ball has had that same reaction of, man, it just kind of gets me pumped and makes me want to work out and kind of motivates me. And I think that's like Gohan, is just, you know, like sometimes he gets really hyped up and motivated and wants to like train and work out and kind of be the best version of himself that he could be. But then that kind of like fades off, and he just kind of like, you know, doesn't want to after a while, and he just slacks off a bit. And I think that's kind of that's a very like just Dragon Ball fan reaction. Is I think everyone has that reaction to watching Dragon Ball, that like sometimes it makes them want to work out, want to push themselves, and then they do that for a while, then they kind of get bored with it and disinterested, and they don't quite have the motivation, so they kind of start slacking off, and maybe instead of going to the gym tonight, I'll just eat a whole sleeve of fucking Oreos, you know. I think that is a very universally like male experience with watching Dragon Ball, and so Gohan's like, I think the rage at adult Gohan might just be like a very like self-reflective anger at the series. And I've not really thought about it in that way before, but just as we're talking about it, I'm like, no, that's kind of my thesis on Gohan as a character. Is he's just a reflection of the fan base.
Yeah, no, I mean 100%. That's really interesting. I struggle with Gohan because I feel like Gohan fans in the Dragon Ball YouTube community can be some of the most annoying people on the planet because they always sound like they're entitled to Gohan being the greatest character just because they like him, and that they're always so pissed off that Akira Toriyama screwed up making Gohan the greatest warrior of all time, and then they like start sort of getting into weird quasi Dragon Ball eugenics language, and it just becomes very uncomfortable very fast when you start talking to people about characters who are the children of the main character with Dragon Ball, but especially with Gohan. So I always am very entertained when there's a Dragon Ball story and Gohan's fucking useless because he doesn't train, because it pisses those people off.
There's nothing quite like spite.
Yep.
Spite just hits just right sometimes.
I 100%, man. I am just here for like scholar Gohan. Just let it happen, man. Let him just be wife guy.
I mean, I quite liked him in in Superhero, where he's just interested in his little nerdy fucking shit and his like Super Saiyan ants and shit. And good for him. But at the same time, when he needs to, he steps up, and if you just kind of had that where like you don't actually need to train super hard all the time, just a little bit or just the right motivation at the right time, you're gonna be at the top, and you just kind of know that in the back of your head. Why would you train? Like, it'd be really hard to have the like motivation to do that. Which is, again, 100% that is a power fantasy, because that's just not ever going to happen for anyone realistically. Like, I don't care how much natural talent you have, like, as a boxer or an athlete or whatever. If you do not train consistently every day, you are going to just fall behind, and you're not going to be able to compete at the top of the game. But for Gohan, he is. Like, there's been moments where he's fallen behind with, like, Fat Boo and with Frieza and Resurrection of F. But if you just give him, if you just give the boy just enough time, you're so fucked. It's actually impressive.
He's kind of the Batman of the Dragon Ball Z universe. You just got to give him prep time.
Yeah, that's all Gohan needs is prep time. And I kind of support him for it.
You brought up an interesting point there that kind of might segue us somewhere else. But when you think about like Macho Fantasies, we're talking a lot about fiction, but like I think sports too play a really big role in this, because when you're watching things like wrestling or football, and I'll just stick to those two because that's the only thing I feel like I could talk about. But there are these sort of narratives created around players that start dominating people's consciousness and start creating certain sort of expectations for themselves and for that person in general. There is like that sort of traditional all-American idea of the kid who grows up watching their favorite player in a sport, and they want to grow up and be just like them, and they start playing that sport and they try to get really good, and it's kind of ambitious and it's kind of cute and yada yada yada. But there is also that other problem of like when you give an athlete like that much power over your identity and power over your life, their influence becomes really important, and their responsibility to say something about that more so than fiction becomes really important. A few weeks ago, there was that big hubbub about Harrison Butker, who was the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, or he still is. I don't think they fired him yet. But he's the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, and he gave a commencement lecture at a college graduation, and he went on this tirade halfway through his speech, essentially just talking to the women in the audience, saying that, like, this might be a very important day for you, but just remember, it will never be as great as if you go home and start bearing children and become housewives. And he just went on this this tirade about like traditional family values, talking directly to the women in the audience, like that's what you should do now that you've graduated college on what is at that point your highest accomplishment. And people got really, really fucking pissed at him, rightfully so. And it's turned up to a degree where like a lot of the people in the NFL have responded, a lot of other players have responded, or even you look at someone like Aaron Rodgers, who is or was for a long time considered one of the greatest quarterbacks playing, and he's a fucking anti-vax conspiracy theory nut. And unlike fiction, because these are real people, and because they have real sway over organizations and kids in particular, what they're saying and what they're doing and their idea of masculinity becomes way more influential from a young age. And so, like, if you're like a really big Kansas City Chiefs fan, and you're like 9 or 10 years old and you're listening to like Harrison Butker talk like this, or if you followed Aaron Rodgers his whole career and you start hearing him talk about like anti-vax bullshit, then that's going to start impacting you. And that the level of play, the level of how good you are in the sport starts to disproportionately affect their opinions that shouldn't have any bearing on that. You think because they're a good football player that what they're saying must also be true, even though it's generally not, because you can be smart in one thing and good at something else. But that becomes a problem. And there was definitely like a conversation to be had as far as like, when you're looking at Macho Fantasies, are you also talking about like role models, and sports role models in particular? What responsibility does like right now does an athlete have to that fan base, and specifically men who predominantly watch sports? Should we have more athletes who are outspoken about things like equal pay for women's leagues, or not say shit about women belonging in the household? Or should like the NFL step in and say, hey, you can't be on a nationally sponsored team and also talk about anti-vax stuff and just fire him or something like that?
It's such an interesting thing to talk about, and I go back to the fucking 90s and the fucking Charles Barkley ads. It's like, I am not a role model. And I'm like, Charles Barkley is like the most fucking vanilla goddamn like sports star that I think we've ever had. Yet he was the one that was in charge of that was like the head of those ads of I'm not a role model. What the fuck did Charles Barkley ever do that was controversial? But in all fairness, I do generally agree with the sentiment. You know, you work your ass off to be good at your job, and your job happens to be sports, right? I don't think you're necessarily responsible for, like, how people view you, or let me rephrase that. I don't think you're responsible for having to present an image that people should like to live up to. And I think, like, when we look at some of the greatest athletes of all time, like, historically, they weren't. Babe Ruth's still the most famous baseball player of all time, and all the dude did was, like, smoke and drink when he was off the fucking field, right? Like, you know, you should be concerned with what your fucking record is, and that's really it. And end of the day, you're just a person. So why the fuck should your personal life be under such scrutiny? Because, like, how much bullshit would you feel if, like, you walked into work tomorrow and they say, hey, there's this new contract you need to sign if you want to keep your job, where you've got to be morally upstanding not only when you're at work, like, but also outside of work. You're not allowed to do any illegal drugs outside of work. Well, fuck you, that's none of your goddamn business. If it's not affecting my on the clock performance, you shouldn't really give a fuck. You know? That's an okay, I'm not sure if this is an entirely separate conversation, so I'm just gonna say this thought and then we can move on. But with the way that like Zoomer culture is so obsessed with like owning your fucking boss and never letting any kind of corporate entity have any sway over you outside of your 9 to 5. It is shocking to me how fucking demanding they are of actors and athletes. Because, goddamn, you're being so fucking hypocritical when you think about it in those terms for like 10 fucking seconds.
Yeah, I feel like there is a difference though between actors and athletes because with actors, the product that they're associated with, the thing that they are doing that makes them famous is fake. Movies are not real. What the characters say and do are not real. So if you're watching a movie and you're watching like Joseph Gordon-Levitt play like a really shitty dude, that's not Joseph Gordon-Levitt, so it doesn't matter as far as who he is morally. And then what he says outside to what he does in the movie, and you still have real world consequences for that though. Like if you're a bad person to work with, then other people shouldn't want to work with you, and you shouldn't keep getting jobs. When you're in the product though, that kind of stuff falls away because you can't do anything about it at that point. With athletes, though, I feel like it's a little bit different because when you talk about things like sponsorships, when you talk about things like how they progress through a league or how they gain prominence in their play, a lot of that stuff is related. When you think about someone like Michael Jordan and the Nike deal and why he has the Air Jordan line, and Nike paying for the fines for his shoes being red because they have a rule about how white your shoe has to be. That kind of stuff becomes much more central to the athlete as well. And when the person doing the thing is doing like a real thing, is like actually out there playing a sport, I think there is a sort of different connotation between like a kid looking up to someone like Christian McCaffrey, who's really, really good at the specific thing he's doing. And then outside of that, everything that he says and does is a reflection of that because he only gets more opportunities because of how he plays with kids or how he can be merchandised. You remember like a few years ago when you had the whole like scandal, not a few years ago, it's a long time ago now, but like with Michael Phelps and all of his fucking Olympic medals, right? Like with kids, especially when it comes with athletes, because they are real people, I think their sway is a lot more damaging than with actors because it's really easy to just say like 500 Days of Summer, Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays a shitty dude, but Joseph Gordon-Levitt is not that dude. So like these two things are not connected. But Aaron Rodgers is a shitty dude, and he plays for a sport that everyone sees, and every time he gets on camera, in and out of game, he's saying shitty things.
I don't know. It's definitely an interesting like conversation, but it's just the thought just occurred to me there of like with how offended we are by the idea of corporations getting to hold sway over our actions outside of our job, and how like pissed off, and maybe rightly so, maybe not, the current generation is at that prospect. It just seems like kind of inherently hypocritical to me that they should want to hold other people to that level of accountability when the idea of having to follow it yourself would be like offensive. Not saying it's right or wrong, just saying I find that dynamic and that like you see where I'm coming from with that is kind of inherently hypocritical.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean to bring it back around to Macho Fantasies, it does kind of go back to what I said earlier about like there is this sort of overcorrection that happens now where you're not really allowed to do the thing that would otherwise be normal or the thing we used to do a lot more of. And when you look at like fiction that's trying to like harken back to like old school values or like older styles of doing things, you have like this sort of puritanical response to it, specifically from younger people, that gets really fucking annoying, because you don't need to fucking like have Mad Max be a feminist icon. You can just watch a good action movie, you know? There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I don't know. The sports analogy is something that's really interesting because there's obviously like things where part of me wants to say, well, if the athlete's good at their job at being an athlete, then they should just be allowed to do whatever the fuck they want off the court, off the mat or whatever. But of course, that's within reason. When you had someone like Floyd Mayweather, who's been like, I don't know if he's been prosecuted, but I know he's been like accused, and that it's come up a number of times of like domestic violence. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't be watching the man fight. Maybe people should stop fucking booking him for fights. Yeah, you know, if he's literally like just using the wealth and fame to try and get away with domestic abuse, that's kind of a problem. But if someone just has shitty political opinions, I don't know. I just guess I don't feel comfortable with policing that, because I wouldn't want that applied to me. If I came into work and I was like pulled in the conference room and they started like pulling up my tweets and saying, Ian, you're a representative of this business both while you're here and while you're at home, and we can't have you tweeting stuff like Donald Trump is the worst president of all time, because someone might read that and associate that opinion with our business. I'd be like, well, fuck you. I don't want my fucking political speech censored just because you don't want it associated with your fucking brand. Like, you know, we're all fucking people, god damn it. You know, even if I had shithead opinions, I still want it, you know, that level of difference. You know, fucking every movie that you buy that has a director's or actor's commentary, it has a fucking blurb. Before you even get to the commentary, it has a blurb at, like, the beginning of the movie that, like, views and opinions expressed in this movie are those of the people commentating, not of the studio or the thing. Like, well, fucking obviously, but apparently we need those fucking warning labels and everything now. If someone's got a shitty opinion, just, yeah, they've got a shitty fucking opinion. Like, move on with your goddamn lives, people. I don't know. I really looked up to this athlete until he said that like, all the Jews must die. Well, okay, then he's just a shitty dude. Who's good at, you know, hitting the baseball. Maybe he shouldn't be, you know, like, allowed to talk to the press anymore. Like, if I were the boss, I'd be like, alright, you're a fucking asshole, but you're good at hitting the baseball, so just shut the fuck up when we're on the dugout and stuff. If they ask you a question that's not baseball related, just don't answer it. You do whatever the fuck you want with your Twitter, that's you, but just don't answer the fucking... We're playing baseball. Don't answer questions about Israel right now, man. That's another thing. You go schedule your own press conference for that shit. I don't care. And maybe that's unreasonable of me. I don't know. I'm of the opinion that that not everybody in a public space needs to be 100% morally aligned with my own personal beliefs. But maybe that makes me a radical. I don't know. Yeah, we're really off topic right now. I'm sorry. But that just got me into a place. This comedian's been canceled for their views. They're a fucking... Why are we holding comedians to a greater, like, standard of moral upbringing than we are fucking politicians? What the fuck happened to the world?
Yeah, we gotta cancel Eminem over saying gay, but the guy with 34 guilty felony charges that can be president still.
Right? Okay. Alright. I think I'm done talking about Macho Fantasies, because like everything on this show, it just devolved into a fucking political debate.
That's fair.
Yeah. Steve, what do we want to talk about next week?
So I am between two options, and I'll let you choose, just in terms of like what you feel like would be easier. I really want to talk about the new Omen movie because it's finally streaming, and I noticed that everyone, now that they're able to see it, is realizing that it's actually really, really good. So I want to kind of capitalize on the hype and say, hey, let's talk about the new Omen movie. On the
I like
other
that
hand,
you have to put that asterisk on there because you know the joke I want to fucking make, and you're not
Yes.
letting me make it.
yes,
and you're
I
a
know,
bad friend.
100%. I refuse
You're
to
a-
say the title.
You're a bad friend, Steve. I want you to know that.
So I really want to talk about that. The other thing I really want to talk about, and this is why I'll let you pick, is I finished reading all 12 volumes of Gundam: The Origin, and there's a series of OVAs that adapts all of it, and it's essentially just like 4 movies. So I haven't had a chance to watch through all of them now that I've finished the manga, because I was watching them like as I was getting through the story elements. So we could talk about the first one, which is essentially just like an hour-long episode of an anime that adapts like a certain number of the volumes. So do you want to do Gundam: The Origin, Episode 1, or do you want to do the first Omen?
I mean, we've already talked about the first Omen movie. That was, months. That was years ago. I don't know why we'd want to go back and talk about just that one. We'd have to talk about like the whole trilogy. Thank you. Thank God. Fuck, I needed that.
Got out of your system.
Yeah, I did. I think I'm going to say the Gundam thing, just because I've been in a bit of an anime kind of vibe lately, and I do kind of, I don't know what it is, man. Something about, like, giant things I really like the idea of, but I rarely actually enjoy it when I'm watching it, so I'm curious to see how Gundam's going to sit with me, because that's, like, my thing about Godzilla. I love the idea of Godzilla, but every time I try to sit down and watch one of those fucking movies, I end up so bored.
All right, cool.
So we'll see how Gundam plays for me.
So it's on Hulu. It's called Mobile Suit Gundam: The Origin, and it's just episode 1, which should be like an hour and a half long, so it's basically movie length.
Okay. Yep, that sounds good to me.
Cool.
Alright. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am peak male performance. This is what all of you are aspiring to. This is what male dominance looks like.
Sounds about right. How goes the count of dem bitches, Steve?
Too many. More bitches,
Alright,
more
good.
problems.
Got it. And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things. So, like your count of bitches, is it like 99 or